How's everybody doing this morning? Fantastic. So this talk is called Vue with Vue. My name is Jacob Schatz. I work at GitLab. Who here has heard of GitLab? Awesome. GitLab has a new startup. It's called Meltano, and it's a data science startup, and I'm starting it up with GitLab. This picture is not me. It came with Keynote, but that is my daughter. No, it's not my daughter. So Meltano is a GitLab startup. It's a data science startup to create one tool to run the complete data science lifecycle. Ooh. And we're using GitLab CLI to accomplish that. And we're also using vuex as our main tool to build this application. And I'll give you a tour of it in a second. But first I want to talk about how vuex helps you organize your code. And the question is, can't I organize the code myself? And so in this episode, we're going to talk about DIY or try. Should we do it ourselves, or should we use vuex? Which is the better option? I'll give you a sneak peek. At Meltano, we chose to use vuex. I made that logo myself. Vuex is Flux inspired. Who here has heard of Flux? Who here knows exactly what Flux is? Aha. So I wanted to explain what Flux is for a second. Let me clear something up. Flux is a suggested architecture. It is not a framework. Flux is just an architecture that's made for building user interfaces. It's basically a set of instructions on how to build your user interface and how to model your application. It's an architecture. It's this way of saying this is how you should build your app. Flux is not a framework. The framework that uses the Flux architecture is called Redux, which is built for React. And so when they say that vuex is Flux inspired, inspired is the key word here, because it does not follow the Flux architecture. It's more inspired by the Flux architecture. So vuex has a store, getters, actions, and mutations. And Flux has a store, a dispatcher, actions, and views. And when you're looking at this chart, I would say, don't look at this chart. Don't look at it. It's too confusing, okay? This is too confusing. So instead, we just say they have similarities, but we're not going to compare them. We're not going to compare them at all. Instead, we're just going to focus on vuex right now. All you need to know is that it's inspired by Flux. And so when you first learn Vue, when you first write Vue for the first time, you'll do something like this, right? Here's your Vue application. This is in CodePen. And you have your data down here, and you return message hello, and then in the HTML you write hello in the curly braces in the handlebar. And so the data, that data method, the object it returns is your store. It's your state, right? So long term, that's not going to work, right? Because multiple components need the same data, right? You're going to have two components that need the same data. So what do you do next? You'll need one place to keep all your data. So you might do something like this, right? So here's your store up here. So you'll create one constant store object, and then in your data, you'll just return store, and then everything can return the store, and everything is wonderful, and this works just fine. So now the store is your store. That constant store on line 1 up there becomes your state, your store, your data, the big cheese, the holy cannoli. Then everything can reference that one store, and everything's good to go. And so this works just fine. This is neat. But at some point, you'll wind up with something like this. Tell me if you've ever had this. Here's your store object now, and it's 6,000 lines long, and you have no idea. Ooh, lights. Can everybody still see the slides okay? Turn the lights off. Please. Thank you. So you'll have your store, and it's like 6,000 lines long, and it's really hard to read, and it's hard to navigate and everything. And so just remember this moment for a second here, because we'll come back to it. It's really, really confusing. It's very hard to navigate your store at this point because you can't tell what's what, what's where. I'm just going to leave this up for a second. No, so here's the problem, right? Your state is huge. It's hard to maintain, and you'll wind up doing silly things, and you'll wind up mutating the state all over the place. And so the question is that bad? Is that a problem? So this is where we're going to start to talk about vuex, right? Vuex is going to potentially solve all these problems, right? It's a centralized state. I'm not talking politically. I'm talking a place to keep all of your application state. And it's a good plan for your mutations. And so you have your getters, your actions, and your mutations. And then you have these helpers that help you organize and inject that code. So you have your map getter, map action, map mutation, and map state for your state. And so let's talk about one of the helpers just for a second here, map state. Map state, what does it do? It maps your state into the computed properties. It just takes the state and injects it into the computed properties. No big deal. And so if we're talking about do it yourself or try it to use vuex, what if we tried to do that on our own? What would we do? Well, we would do almost exactly what we did before. We would have our store, and we would use a method this time, and then in the computed properties, we would just inject store, right? This would be doing what map state does. So then if we talk about if we use map state, if we don't use map state, but we use vuex, not the helper, but using map state. So then what would we do? Well, now we're doing almost the same exact thing as before, except we're using the vuex store object. And then we're returning store.state.message there on line 13. So that works too, that's another option. And then last but not least, if we use vuex with map state, what would it look like? Well, it's the smallest amount of code of all. The question is, do we need to do it? Same exact thing on the top, line 7, new store, and then line 16, use the object spread and just insert message, and it automatically gets inserted. Everything's good to go. And so the question is, how does this work? What is the magic? So here's the method map state, and I don't expect you to read all of this right now. All we really need to focus on is one line here. Please zoom in, thank you. And then you have this function map state, which literally just places your function into a computed property, because the object spread operator is going to turn into an object. And so this is just wrapping it in a function. And that's all it really does. It's really, really simple. It's not complicated at all. And then if you look down here, it just places the function. It just returns the function. depending on a couple of different things. If it's a function, it returns a function, and if not, then it returns a function. It's all very simple. Don't worry about it, right? Vue does state. Vue creates state the same exact way that we were doing state. Do you remember this big, huge chunk of code? Well, look at what the docs for vuex says. It says that vuex uses a single state tree. That just means it uses one giant object like we were just doing before. That's what vuex has. And it uses it as its single source of truth. So vuex does exactly what we were doing before, that gigantic object. One store, one state, one object to rule them all. But the difference with vuex is that vuex breaks it up into modules. Modules. So how does it break it up into modules? Well, let's take a look at, first of all, what am I talking about when I say modules? Here's some code from our startup Meltano. You can see right here that we pass the store a list of modules, right? For my app, it's projects, repos, explorers, settings, orchestrations, whatever that means. That's our list of modules. And so in the source code here, check this out. This is the constructor for the vuex store. And if we zoom in here, you can see down there, it's taking that option, that list of options, whether you passed modules or not, it passes it to a module collection. And then if we go to the module collection, whatever that is, it registers a module with the object that you passed it, which was not a module. You clearly did not ask for a module, and it's giving you a module. And then it says if the path length is 0 because you don't have any modules yet, what it's going to do is it's going to say, this is the root module. So the object that you pass into vuex becomes a module. It becomes your root module. And then it loops through any other modules that you have placed in it. So it's kind of like a recursive function. It's so recursive. And so you have this kind of inception. If you can see up there, there's a module up there. Moduleception. So believe it or not, you are always using nested modules, whether you like it or not. And how does vuex actually do reactivity? Like, how does it actually do reactivity? When I first looked at this, it blew my mind. Maybe you all knew this before. I didn't know this. So here's this method called reset state VM. I think it's called reset store VM. And it's called from the constructor of the store. Has anybody seen this before? Okay, good. So the big reveal here, right? If we zoom in, it says store._VM. What does it do? It creates a new Vue object and it places your state into the data object of a Vue VM. It literally uses Vue for reactivity. It just creates this Vue object and keeps it as the store. That's really smart. And it's really simple too. It's kind of cool. So vuex used the original method that we were talking about in the beginning to organize the code. vuex uses Vue for reactivity, which is kind of mind-blowing. So how do actions actually work? What are actions? Actions are just methods. The only difference between them is that actions can return promises. Otherwise, they should have just named them methods, right? So check this out. Actions are stored in the store in a private variable. So check this line out. There's the actions. It just stores it. And object.createNull, all that does, whoops, let's go back for a second. Can I go back? Yes, okay. Object.create, no, all that does is just create an empty object. That's just creating an empty object. It's just fancy. It's cute. When dispatch actually gets called, here's the dispatch method of vuex. All this stuff, don't worry about it. The main meat of it is right down here. If you can kind of grok this line of code real quick, actually, just ignore it all and look at line 135 there. It just calls the action. That's all it does. Vuex is just a forwarding service. It's kind of like a courier. It just takes the thing you gave it and then calls it. That's really all it does. There's like nothing going on in the Vuex code. How do mutations work? Mutations are also no big deal. It's kind of mind-blowing. So here's your mutations object, same exact thing, empty object. And that's just like saying this dot underscore mutations is equal to an empty object. Similar thing, slightly different, but when it registers the mutation, it pushes in a function that it can wrap it in so that it can call it. It just stores a big wrapped function. And then when you call commit in vuex, check this out. It just calls the function. That's all it does. It's like, oh my gosh, it's so simple. Now it does it for every single entry that there is, but still it's just calling functions. So vuex is very, very simple. There's like nothing in it. It's just a simple way to organize your code. And the real focus of it is to give you one way to write your code. It's not about the source code of vuex and the magic of vuex. It's more about how it makes you organize your code. So it's based on Flux, but it's not Flux. And it's all made possible with the power of Vue. So knowing these things helps you write vuex. And so one of the common questions you might ask is, well, what about modifying the state param? Can I modify the state param directly? Well, something like this, where you just say state.all equals products. This is directly, the problem with this that people will say is that, what are you doing, you fool? You're not supposed to do that because ESLint says don't do that, don't modify the param directly. But this example is totally fine because it's from the documentation. They do it in the documentation. It's fine, it's meant to work that way. And what about other options then? What would you use instead? You would use object.assign, but there's no reason to do that. So you can modify the objects directly because Vue works internally with proxies. And this is the big difference between React and Vue. Vue has proxies, so you can modify the object and it keeps track of it. React needs those mutations to keep track of the state. So you don't need to copy objects around to track the changes. Vue implements its own push method for arrays so that it can react to it. React reactivity works differently, but we aren't reusing React, so it's totally kosher. So we use vuex at Meltano and GitLab, and we're building one app for the entire data science lifecycle. And from now on, you can just imagine that that giant ring there is Meltano. In Vue with vuex. And so here's how we did it. ELTs, does anybody know what an ELT is in data science? Okay, ELT just stands for extract, load, and transform, and I'm going to explain it with a quick example, thanks to Brittany from GitLab. So Brittany from GitLab says, hey, Jacob, how long does it take us to get from resume to hire? All the best, Brittany. And then there's me. I say, I don't know, let me find out. And so then, using the power of Meltano, the ring, and some of the data from Greenhouse, we soak up all the data from Greenhouse, and then we store it in a giant data warehouse. And once we store it in a giant data warehouse, then we can run analytics on it. And once we run analytics on it, Brittany can ask us once again, how long does it take us to get from resume to hire? And I can say, on average, 2 weeks. Thanks, Jacob. So that's how that works. Now, this is an example of Meltano in action. You can notice that I can switch between different charts, and those charts are all just a state of an array of data points. And this is real data here that I asked our CEO if I could show real data, and he said yes. And so you're looking at real data here, and the data in the table is the same data that's coming to the chart, and it's all reactive because of Vue. And so here's another example here. We have a project explorer here, and you can select different projects, and it's sending off an action, and it's loading a file. And when you click extract to actually extract the data, you're selecting an action, you're selecting the state, and it's loading, it's going off to an asynchronous request, and it's pulling data back. And you can do the same with the loaders. And this is all just basic vuex stuff, right? And so there in comes the log. The log is part of the state that gets loaded, and we can click run. And with the transformer, it's actually going and it's running a sub-process. It's running a terminal command, and then it comes back with that terminal command, loads it into that log, and prints it all out. And here's our really cool view. We click these different dimensions, and it's actually generating SQL that's going to run. The SQL that's getting generated is generated on the Python side, but every click, I run an asynchronous request to go get the rest of that. And I had to blur it out because there's some company names in there. But you can see all the SQL queries that are getting run, and that's getting run on an actual data warehouse. So all that's happening is we click on something, we run an action, the action goes, makes an asynchronous request, it comes back and with some data, and that data either updates the SQL or loads data for the chart to run. And so really quickly, I just want to show you the way that our app is laid out. All we did is we generated it with Vue CLI, so we got the layout automatically. And if you take a look, I actually separated some of our Vue components into another folder. Some people don't like that. And if you take a look here, here's our API. So you usually have a separate API section where you make all your API requests, right? And if we take a look at what they look like, look at how simple they are. They're really simple because it's just Axios returning a promise. And if we return a promise from Axios, then in our action, we can just call api.index.then, and we can do all the stuff there. But we don't make our API call directly in the action. We put that in an API. And if we take a look at some of our explorers here, so here's two getters, right? We have isResult tab and isSQL tab. And this is all in the template part of your .vue file, right? If we scroll down to the script part, we just do map getters, and we do isResult tab, isSQL tab, and it's all nice and neat in there. And one huge benefit is you can see here's a component, result table. That was that table that had all the actual financial data in it. We don't have to pass it any properties. We don't have to pass it anything. Why? Because it has access to the global store. So we just say result table, and it works. So because I started with Vue CLI, the Vue CLI generated code for me, and because of that, I get linting on all of my Vue files on save, and I get linting on all of the things, all of my different types of files. I also got a sweet vuex setup. Vuex was set up for me from the beginning, which makes it really easy. I also got Webpack set up. I have all the Webpack configs already set up dev and prod and builds. So that's a lot of boilerplate that I don't need to deal with, all thanks to Vue CLI. So in this episode of Do It Yourself or Try, the question is, should we have done it ourselves or should we use vuex? Well, the thing is that we could have done it ourselves, and our methods are the methods that vuex uses. So we definitely could have done it ourselves. But with all the benefits that the Vue CLI gives us, and that nice nature, that nice flow of code that we can follow in vuex, I would say that you should use the Vue CLI with vuex and don't do it yourself, because it comes with batteries included. Thank you very much.
Pessoal, vocês têm perguntas? Opa, já temos ali. Caramba!
Hello, Jacob. What was the most challenging part of building this app for you?
So the question was, what was the most challenging part of building the Meltano app? Well, first of all, GitLab. So I started the front-end team at GitLab, and I hired 17 front-end developers. It's really hard to organize 17 developers to write Vue all in the same way. Meltano, on the other hand, I'm the only one writing the code, so it's really easy. Nobody argues with me about anything. I'm in charge of everything. So I think right now the hardest thing is just the pace at which we're moving. That app that you're looking at there, I've basically put together in the past 3 weeks, and it's just been like an absolute whirlwind. I'm coordinating with data scientists, and I'm trying to convince them right now that this idea is a really good idea and that they should use our product. The data scientists on the GitLab team. And so we're trying to replace a whole bunch of tools with Meltano, and we're kind of doing it with 4 developers, and it's a really, really cool project to work on. But I have to say, because I did GitLab and I did all this stuff in vuex before, and I now have read the source code, writing the actual code is really boring and easy. The solutions are, you're like, no big deal.
Mais? Você tinha mais duas, né? Malandrão.
2 perguntas.
Is this project open source?
Yes. Oh, I forgot to say, Meltano is completely open source. Unlike most of the data science stuff that you'll see out there, you can go look it up on GitLab. If you go to GitLab/Meltano, you'll see all of our different projects in there, including the Meltano source code.
What is your recommendations to, if I want to start contributing to this project or even contributing to GitLab's community edition?
Yeah, you should definitely go take a look at our source code, run it on your laptop, and we have issues. In GitLab, we have an issue tracker just like in GitHub. And you can look at all the open issues, and you can see what's available. I label them with, help needed or feature requests. We're very open. If you want to say, like, your app needs this, and you just write it, we will totally read that, and we'll look through it, and we'll decide whether it's legit or not. 9 times out of 10, we'll just take whatever you say and do it because, we want contributors. We love contributors.
Thanks. And my last question is, what is your recommendations when I'm building components? How can I decide if I pass the state from one component to another, or just use the start state?
Yeah, I think in the workshop we covered some of this too yesterday, which is a really good question, and I think neither of those answers are wrong. Like, neither of those are wrong. if you have a global state that is available, you can use it. As soon as you tie your component to a global state, you make it less reusable on a like distributable level. So your component becomes less distributable. And sometimes properties can act like in object-oriented programming, you have private variables. So those properties can act as kind of private variables to your component, meaning like data that only exists in your component. It doesn't need to exist anywhere else. So I like to think of the properties as kind of a local state or a private state, and the vuex store as kind of a global state. And if you need to reuse it, you got to think about that too.
Alguém tem mais pergunta? Opa.
So the question is, what should not be inside of a vuex store? Yeah, okay. I mean, I think the thing about vuex and Vue is that it lets you kind of do whatever you want. I think the big thing is to make sure that you separate the things really well, so your getters, your actions, and your mutations, so that you're actually only doing state changes in your mutations, unless they change that later, that you're doing all asynchronous calls, and you can think of your actions as business logic. Think of it as in your MVC, your controller. So don't do tons of business logic in your mutations. And you can think of getters as just computed properties. And if you think of it like that, then it makes your life a whole lot easier. But I don't see, a lot of people have a problem with like these huge files with lots of variables in them. I don't actually have a problem with that too much. It's only when the reason to separate out things is to make it not just easier for you to read, not easier for everybody else to read, but also easier to separate the concerns. That's the reason you separate it, is to separate the concerns. So if you don't need to separate the concerns, then, don't do it. Does that answer your question? Cool.
Última pergunta aqui.
Thank you. Eu vou falar em português, então, que agora deu branco, tá? Eu li uma matéria no Quanta Magazine que a pessoa estava sugerindo usar mais map state de vez de map getters, porque o map state era mais performático do que o map getters. Eu queria saber se é realmente isso que acontece, a gente deveria limitar mais o uso ou não, é normal e tudo bem usar assim. Tá? Obrigado.
So he read in a magazine called Quanta that map state is actually more performatic than map getters. Is that true?
No. Sorry. Map state, I don't know why it would be more performant, because both of the helpers themselves don't do much. They literally just wrap it in a computed property. So I'm trying to think of why it would be more performant. And also, when people say more performant, you have to at least raise your eyebrow a little bit, because more performant, you have to have performance problems in the first place, to need more performant. If your app is running really smoothly and there's no performance problem, you know what I mean? Like, so like, let's say that, like, if you write like 600 map states, it's not going to make your app slow, right? Because it's just, maybe a higher footprint for memory. Yeah, so I think that they're both doing relatively the same thing. They're both kind of wrapping the state in a computed property. So, no, that's not true. That's not true. Map state is not doing that. But either way, no, there's no different, there shouldn't be that much difference in performance. And it shouldn't scare you from using map getters. That's the main point.
All right, that was the last one. So Jacob, in the name of Vue.js Summit, Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You actually get a prize too.
Oh, wow.
Yes, if I can get it. There you go, sir.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, man. That was awesome.